Dear church, let's talk 10 more questions for 10 more preachers with Matthew Moran. Hello, welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Excited about my guest. I say that every week, Matthew, but I am excited to have my good friend, Matthew Moran, all the way from Colorado on the podcast. Of course, you're not in the studio with us. You are in Colorado, and I appreciate you so much for being patient as our new studio is coming together at Walnut Street in Dixon, Tennessee. Had a few little errors trying to get on today, but you were so patient waiting on us. Thank you for that, Matthew. Tell us a little bit about what's going on there in Castle Rock and kind of what's going on in your life.
Well, I drove in a little bit of snow and ice, which is probably different from everybody else. And and then got to the office and I'm kind of freezing to death. I have a tropical, body, but I live in the north.
But you grew up in this, didn't you? I mean, this is not like the snow and ice is not new to you, right? You being from Nova Scotia?
That's what everybody says. Everybody says, like, I shouldn't be cold because I grew up in Canada. The problem is my body froze so many times up in Canada that I have terrible body circulation now. So
I understand.
The only thing I did up in Canada was learn that I don't like the cold.
Yes. Well, so I came from Abilene where it's, 100 degrees every day and no humidity. And I moved to a place where you get the seasons, but boy, do you get the seasons, right? You've got the cold, rainy weather right now and I'm adjusting, but it's been worth it. So that's for sure. Hey, thanks for joining us, man. I appreciate you being on here and we're going to fire some questions at you and see what you can do with them. Okay. Most of them are softballs. All right.
Okay.
So here's the first one. Kind of tell us the story behind how you became a preacher.
Well, I kind of have a positive and a negative, and I guess I'll start with the negative. The negative was I wasn't really good at anything in life. And so
I doubt that's true.
No, it's very true, very true. And so then I got invited to speak, I remember, at a church in Kemptville, Nova Scotia. And I gave this, I planned for 20, 30 minutes, and I think I was done in 4 minutes and 35 seconds. And the member said it was a fantastic lesson. And looking back on that, I thought they actually meant the lesson was good. What they really meant was it was only 4 minutes and 35 seconds.
There you go.
And church members really praised me. And I don't think I was ever really used to a lot of praise and somebody actually thinking I did a good job. So, God really used their lying to motivate me to be a preacher. And I think it was just, I don't know, it was almost seductive when I look back on it. And it was something that I was like, wait, I'm good at this. Now, looking back on it, I realized that that's not true because my church members here in Castle Rock say, man, you got really good. You've really grown. Well, 14 years ago, they weren't saying that to me. They were like, oh, you're so good. If I was good back then, why am I so much better today?
It's kind of a dubious honor, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure about this. So I think our churches are set up to convince young men they're good at preaching. So I think that got me involved. As I have matured and got a little wiser, I think the reason I enjoy preaching today is because I've seen the power of transformation, where I have seen people give their lives to the Lord and really embrace the gospel, and their lives change. And my life changed because of the gospel. I experienced transformation, and I want to give that transformation in that pathway to others. So that's why I preach today.
Well, and let me say this. I can speak from having heard you several times that you definitely know what you're doing and you're very good at it. So I appreciate the work that you're doing and how God has brought you along to this point. I think it's fantastic, and you're doing great things at the Castle Rock Church. I know that too. Tell us kind of who encouraged you, who motivated you, who inspired you along the way.
I've had three major mentors in my life. And the first one was Brian Garnett, and he was the preacher up in Nova Scotia.
Okay.
And he invited me down to help his family move. And he baptized me, and he kind of nurtured my young faith for the first couple years. And then I went off to Heritage, and then God providentially opened the door. So there was an older man named Bernice Westbrooks, and he was an associate minister at the Hartsville Pike Church of Christ. And
Okay.
one day I just met him. I was in Muscle Shoals at the Highland Park Church of Christ, and he walked up to me and he's like, "Hello, I'm Bernice." And I said, "I'm Matthew." He goes, "Oh, what do you do?" And we just had this random conversation. And then I told him I was a student at Heritage. And he goes, "Well, what's your plan?" I said, "Oh, I'm going to go back to Nova Scotia and I'm going to convert the entire province." And he thought, this is arrogant. But I don't hear anybody say, like, with anything about evangelism anymore. Usually our young ministers are like, "I'm going to be a preacher and I'm going to preach for the largest churches and I'm going to speak at all the big brotherhood events." And he
Right.
thought it was shocking that this young guy wanted to go convert a bunch of people. Now, that never happened, Chris, just to make sure everybody knows.
Okay. Yeah, there's the disclaimer, right?
Yes. That was much more boasting than any productivity. And
Yes.
but then he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, can we support you?" I did an internship there at that church, ended up meeting my wife. He was my mentor for many, many years. And I'm in ministry today because of his great loving kindness and his concern. He passed away when I went to Waynesboro some years later, and I did his funeral. But he was a huge mentor in mine. And then the other man that I would say is my mentor is Greg Tidwell. He's the editor of the Gospel Advocate,
Yeah.
and we're dear friends, and he has really encouraged me and really helped me continue to grow. I remember when Bernice passed away, and I sat there and I thought, what am I going to do now? Like, I grew up in Canada. I have no Christian family. I'm lost. But God always provided somebody to really build that mentoring relationship with me. And it has made a huge difference.
Yeah.
If I didn't have my mentors, I'm not sure how I'd be doing a ministry today. Mentoring is so important in the church.
Totally agree. Totally agree. So tell me this, what do you think, in your mind, in your opinion, what is if you had to narrow it down to one, the single greatest attribute that a preacher needs to have?
Well, I've had the nature of people pleasing for many years, but that hasn't really served me well.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, that one seems to be successful until it's not. I think what has helped me is self-definition or definition. Defining who you are in light of who God is.
I love that. Yeah.
Because I've allowed church members to define me. I've allowed my brokenness to define me. I've allowed my ambition to define me. And all of that has been for naught. But when God truly defines who I am and what I am, I feel a sense of contentment and purpose and peace. That doesn't mean that everybody likes me or everybody's happy with me, but I have peace because I have defined myself in light of who God is.
Love that. Yeah. You know, it's a great thing as a preacher, and I know you would agree with this, when you figure out who you are in light of God, right?
Yep.
So I've told this story before, but when I was a kid, my friend had an uncle who was a country music singer. And every time he would play for us, he was really good. But if he was playing Randy Travis, he tried his best to sound like Randy Travis. or George Strait, he tried his best to sound like George Strait. And it was like, why don't you just be you? If you'd sing it like you can sing it, it would be much better. And I think when I started out, I tried to be Jeff Jenkins or Greg Tidwell or some of these guys that I admired, respect. And when I found out, which is a great goal, right? But when I found out I can just be me, and that's a very freeing experience. That when you compare yourself to everybody else, you always fall short. At least I do. And but when you find out kind of who you are in light of God and just be yourself, that's a great freeing experience. Tell me, what has been your biggest challenge as a minister?
Well, I'd like to quote my friend Taylor Swift. It's me. I'm the problem. It's me. And
Yeah.
and it's true.
I didn't think we were. I didn't expect you to quote the great theologian Taylor Swift on the podcast today, but that's great.
Hey, she has some good lines.
She does, yes.
And so I'm the problem. I found the biggest challenge when I really look at it. I think I have been the biggest challenge, and really allowing Christ to work in me, because I have been too aggressive and I wasn't showing compassion, love, the nature of Christ. I've been too loving in the sense that I let people walk all over me and not really stand up for myself, where when I really can align myself with how Christ behaved and knowing the balance of that, there's times to say, no, everybody, tables are going to be turned. This is where the line is, and I'm not compromising.
Yeah.
And then there's other times of, hey, we all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. Let me show you grace. Let me show you love. Let me be as soft and gentle as a sheep. And then there's other times to be shrewd like a serpent. Other times there's like to be a lion. And so the problems of ministry that I find myself in is usually because my character wasn't refined into the character of Christ, and I brought the problems on myself.
Yeah. I could say that as well. That's great. Yeah, definitely. So turn that around. What has been the biggest blessing for you in ministry? And this is probably a time where you don't say yourself.
Me. Yeah. No,
same answer, right? Me.
Chris. I really think that sometimes we can really get negative on the church. And there's always problems. We deal with politics, we deal with problems. It just never ends. I always say I live in a petri dish of conflict. But at the end of the day, I came from the world, and I would much rather be around Christian people. Christian people are good people. I've met so many amazing individuals that love Jesus, love me, and they just want to bless me. They just want to be gracious to me and kind.
Yes.
I live in a bubble of goodness.
Yes.
And I get to do that. And it's almost unfair that I get to be surrounded by Christian people who love Jesus, because I may have been formed by Christ. They have been formed by Christ. And some of them are much more formed into the image of Christ than I am. And I get to reap that blessing of being in their presence, of Christ being manifested through them, and that beautiful aroma of Christ emanates from them, and I get to smell it, and it's a huge blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you put that. Get to smell it. That's a beautiful way to put it. So let me ask you this: shift gears a little bit. This is for our preacher friends out there, because I think it's a question they always bring up when I ask for questions to maybe ask our preachers. And one of them that always comes up is what does a typical work week look like? And I know typical is kind of a sliding term, or can differ depending on who the person is you're asking. But for you, what does, if you had a normal, quote unquote, normal work week where you could get everything on a schedule and done, what would that look like for you?
You mean I work about 21 minutes a week. They
Yeah,
say
well, of
that
course,
preachers only
we
work
all know
on
that, right?
Sundays. I don't even work a
Yeah.
full Sunday. And I believe this, if the Lord can take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and feed 5,000, I can give 21 minutes a week and the Lord can multiply that.
Absolutely.
No.
I don't think that's true, but go ahead with that.
So Monday morning, bulletin, PowerPoint, start the sermon. Okay. That's what everything. Tuesday is sermon development day, and I write the sermon on Tuesdays. Wednesdays, I write 5 thank you cards every single Wednesday. Okay.
Okay.
I create a newsletter, leadership newsletter that goes out once a month. You get work on that. I do 1 leadership lunch a month as well. That may happen, but usually I eat lunches on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Okay.
Okay.
That's kind of, then I have on Tuesdays, if I finish the sermon, then I go into Sunday morning class, but usually that's going to be on Wednesdays, and that's Sunday morning and then Wednesday night class. Okay. That's what I do on Wednesdays. Thursdays is the catch-up day. Anything I need to do. I do a lot of my, what we call pastoral stuff, calling people, checking on people, shooting the breeze with people on Thursdays. Fridays, I always take off if I can. I try to protect that a lot more than I do. Saturdays, I try to be off as well, unless there's something going on. And then Sundays, I'm back.
Wow. Yeah, that was very succinct. Thank you for that. Yeah. And of course, we're not talking about throwing in a funeral or two, and all that, but that kind of, messes with it a little bit. But it sounds like you've got a process down. So tell me, when you sit down to work on a sermon, what is that process like?
So I have a yearly retreat every single year. So I survey the congregation. I send out a survey for any feedback from the church. What am I doing well? What am I doing poorly? And I usually ask a dumb question at the very end about, do I look good in which suit? And that way they actually give me better feedback, because then they get to make a joke at the end.
Yes.
So I send out a survey, and then I go do a yearly retreat. The yearly retreat, I get feedback from my eldership. We always pick a theme book of the year, and then we have a theme. Okay. So I always make sure the theme is cultivated from text. It's never what I come up with. It comes from text, the book, and then I create the theme from that book. Okay. So I always want God to be leading the process. That's 1 year in advance. Then I start writing all my sermons. So then I come up with every sermon and every series 1 year in advance. Okay. So I know exactly where I'm going, what I'm doing, and I have a record of all that. Then I write all my sermons about 2 months in advance. In the sermon process, I manuscript the sermon. Okay. And then I'm always looking for the text, major text. So it's kind of an expository style, but only in how I engage the text. And then I allow the form to shape the sermon, not trying to impose an expository university style on the sermon. So it depends on how I want to preach it. Okay. Then I have the major image. I always have one image. It comes from 4 pages of a sermon, because one image, so all my illustrations usually will fall into that image that they can really kind of channel with as well. And then 1 week before the sermon is going to be preached, I write the I do the PowerPoint for that. Okay.
Okay.
And then, so that's kind of the sermon process. but I'm reading constantly. I read every night from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night. And I don't
Wow.
read spiritual books. I read just anything, history books, psychology books, business books, everything. It's kind of the Benjamin Franklin methodology to really have a wide expanse of information. That's always on the
Yeah.
Kindle. I can track all that. I can pull those stories up there, and they fit into my text.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. So do you practice? Do you get in the pulpit before anybody gets in the auditorium? Do you stand in front of the mirror? I mean, do you practice or anything?
Uh, no, but so the process is on Saturday, I read the sermon twice over. So on Monday, I write the bulletin, so I go over everything. But then on Saturday, I have to read the sermon, the manuscript twice. On Sunday, I read it twice again. So that
Okay.
means I'm at home, I pull it up on the iPad, I read it. And then I come into the office, I have a time of quietness, and then I read the sermon again. And then I make any notes on the manuscript. I don't bring the manuscript to the pulpit. So it's all
Oh.
extemporaneously preached at that point, which sometimes you're done like this past week and you're like, oh, I should have said this. I planned to say that. And then you
Mhm.
forget. But a lot of times it comes off a lot more naturally. And I just use my PowerPoints that I can see in front of me to guide my thoughts. And that's my
Yeah.
shifts. And that's how I do that.
Yeah, I like that. I'm kind of like you. I look at it on Saturday. I look at it again on Sunday. One Saturday recently, when I was looking over my lesson, I fell asleep. That's not a good sign, right? If I'm falling asleep in my own sermon, that's probably not a good sign. So, so Matthew, I know you have children. You've got a senior, I believe, in high school right
Yeah.
now.
Yep.
You've got a son that's pretty active in sports. You and I have talked several times about soccer and tennis because my son, who's a senior in college now, played those sports, and you've got a son that's pretty good at that. And so you've called, and we've talked about those kind of things, the ins and outs of it, and I love talking to you about that. Tell us a little bit about how you balance. Work and things like that. I've been coaching, assistant coaching with the baseball team here in Dixon County. I know you've helped with the tennis team, maybe still doing that. Tell us how
Yep.
you balance all that and how that works.
Um, Not very well for a lot of years. I
Yeah,
really have failed in that department. Um,
me too.
that yeah, I had codependency problems, and
Hmm.
and I needed people to like me. So every time somebody would ask me something, I'd say yes, and I didn't know how to define myself very well. So I really think for the very early part of my ministry, and really not that long ago, I think I really struggled with balancing everything. And I would have to say,
Right.
if the balance wasn't there, it was just failure. And I don't think I was there as much for my wife and my kids. And I remember having this realization that I was gone too much. And I remember our executive minister here, I talked to him one day and I said, you are going to approve every time I'm gone. And he's like, why? Like, I don't have to approve. I said, no, you're going to approve it because I want to please people. You don't care if like I go speak at that thing. You don't care.
Right.
And and so I had a very limited calendar because I realized I was so busy trying to be super preacher that I
Mm,
was not doing my number one responsibility by being a husband and a father. They can
yes.
get another person to speak, but my
Yeah.
son and my daughter can't get another dad. And
It's a
and
great
I
point.
I failed. I just I was I think I was on that path of losing my wife, my kids, and they weren't going to go anywhere. They're great people. They supported me, but
Yeah.
they were better people than me. And I wanted to
Yeah.
be that preacher that
Yeah.
did all that stuff. And then I finally was like, I'm done with this. I'm narrowing when I'm gone. And then even with all my activities, uh what I have found is we're all rock climbing together as a family. And that's what we do. We go rock climbing. I'll at 9:00 at night. I had an elders meeting till 9:00 last week. And I get off the elders meeting at 9, and I look at my son, and he's like, "You want to go rock climbing?" Yep. And we went and rock climbed for an hour. And
That's awesome.
And I think that's the key. I may get in trouble for this, but I signed my wife up and I for dance lessons.
Oh, okay. That's exciting.
Well, no, it's really bad. I'm terrible. I can't sing. I have no beat.
That's me.
Yeah. I'm a Church of Christ preacher.
You're not supposed to be good at those things.
No, I'm not. And nobody could accuse me of being good at it. But I'm really trying to create the space to put my family first. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I think another thing is preachers don't get to take a lot of trips. We take our vacation, but we don't really take weekend trips. My family bonds over trips. And so my elders have given me another sabbatical. So next month, I'm actually gone all the month of February to Monterey. And it's something my elders are very conscious of. So my whole family is going to get to be together for a whole month. And we're going to get to spend time together because I everybody works hard jobs. But why are we going to model workaholic behavior in our ministers?
No, I agree. We feel like we're productive if we're doing more. And I've just heard it over and over again from guys wiser and older than me that have said, be careful. I was gone every night of the week doing Bible studies. The church was growing. The elders were happy, but I was losing my family in the process. And so last question, Matthew, let me ask you this. What advice would you give to maybe a preacher starting out or young preachers, or maybe even, preachers been doing it a while? What's the one piece of advice that you would give to them in order to be successful in ministry?
Focus on survival, not success.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Focus on survival, not success. Most of the young ministers that I have mentored, myself included, when I started ministry, I wanted success. I want it to be productive. I want it to prove myself. And there's a lot of young ministers that do really well. Things take off for them.
Yeah.
And they don't survive. So one of the young guys I was mentoring recently, there was a book that was sent out for a mentoring program. They said, you'll use this book. And I looked at the book, and I think there was 12 or 13 authors. 5 of them or 6 of them all are not in ministry, or if they are, they had huge ramifications. Attempted suicide.
Yeah.
Adultery. Failure. Quitting. Burnout. And I said, we can study this book about how to preach. But the number one lesson is those guys aren't preaching because they didn't survive. You got to survive and focus on that, not success.
Man, that's great, Matthew. Hey, I can't thank you enough for taking time to be with us today. And, I hope and pray that the work there in Castle Rock continues to go well. I have no doubt that it will. I want to tell our viewers and listeners that if they have a question specifically for Matthew in this episode, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. We'll make sure that it gets forwarded to Matthew, and I'm sure he'd be glad to interact with you. And we just want you to share the news about the podcast. Let us know what you think. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, those platforms. Matthew, before we go, plug anything that you want. We want this to be a place where, we can promote the good. So what's going on? I know you've written some books. What else? What do you got coming up?
Well, Heritage Christian University is publishing my next book in the next few months called Wild Transformation. And it kind of tells my story of coming to Christ from a non-Christian background up in Nova Scotia and trying to figure this stuff out. how to become a disciple of
Good.
Jesus Christ. And it's pretty, I try to make it very honest and really share the story of how can we do this, because it can be done and it's really powerful when it's done. So I guess I'll just plug that. Wild Transformation. It should be coming out from Heritage Christian University. And Chris, thank you so much for having me. I really respect you and appreciate you. And I hope everything's going well in your transition to Tennessee. And as you can see in the back, I got a Nashville Predators signed jersey because I went to a team
Yes.
party years
Yes.
ago. Go Preds.
Well, go Preds. And I want our viewers and listeners to know that our boots on the ground producer here in Walnut Street is Craig Anderson, who is a cameraman for the Predators. And you can't see him. He's behind the camera right now. But Craig says hello to everybody. We appreciate him so much. So yes, go Preds. And thank you so much, Matthew. And for everybody watching and listening, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.